A very warm welcome to everyone to day 2 of the second Cervical Cancer Forum on Accelerating Action on HPV and Cervical Cancer. Welcome back to everyone who joined yesterday already. I hope you are well rested and are ready for a new day of learning about cervical cancer and how to tackle this disease. I'm happy to hand over to Dr. Sawsan Madhi, Director General of Friends of Cancer Patients in the UAE, and Dr. Shible Sahbani, Regional and Sexual Reproductive Health Advisor of UNFPA Arab States Regional Office, who will give us a short recap of day 1.
Thank you, Rhoda, and welcome again, everybody, for the second day in the Cervical Cancer Forum. We are very happy to welcome each and every one of you. Really, yesterday we were very excited about the first day and the success of the first day. We had an amazing and insightful speakers, either keynotes or panel, which I'm going to be reflecting, and also my colleague, Dr. Shible, will be reflecting on for the next 10 minutes. Of course, the most important and very prominent session was the first opening session. We had our patron, the patron for the forum, Her Hanaa Sheikh Jawahir bin Muhammad Al-Qasimi, the wife of the ruler of Sharjah, and also the patron of Friends of Cancer Patient, officially inaugurating the second Cervical Cancer Forum with a very passionate and very emotional speech where she actually reflected on the loss the woman lost due to cervical cancer and made it more tangible and grounded for all of us. She mentioned that these women can be our mothers, they can be our sisters, they can be our daughters, and can be a woman that actually carrying on their shoulders families. So with that emotional and really touching speech from Her Highness, it really made us feel how important it is for us and what is the importance of the Cervical Cancer Forum and the elimination of also HPV and cervical cancer. Second, we heard from our president, Her Excellency Sawsan the chairperson of Friends of Cancer Patient Board of Directors, and she was reflecting on Friends of Cancer Patient role. Of course, we are the organizer in partnership with the UNFPA for this forum for the second time, but also what we do on a national level and regional and global when it comes to advocacy. We also heard a very prominent and very effective speech from His Excellency Abdulrahman Al-Awais, the Minister of Health of UAE, where he explained and he laid the path for what UAE mission and how UAE is tackling cervical cancer with a staggering success of almost 89% of success rate when it comes to vaccination for young girls in HPV. Of course, in the opening session, we had amazing also speaker and leadership from UNFPA, from WHO, and also representation from United Nations as well, and from IAA, which is the International Agency for Atomic Energy. Dr. Shible, maybe you can give us more about the theme 1 of the day.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sawsan. Sabah al-khair, good morning, bonjour everyone. Yes, I agree with you 100%. It was an amazing day. The discussions were very informative and there was an open discussion as well, which is really good. We had a lot of feedback from the audience as well, which shows the interest and the importance of this topic. If I may start, maybe I will start with theme 1, where we discussed the 2021, where we are with the cervical cancer. And we had 2 very important keynotes, one from WHO on the regional perspective on eliminating cervical cancer in the Arab region, and our colleague and friend, Dr. Nasim, technical officer in the UHC NCD's department in WHO. She gave actually a very good presentation. So she gave the regional situation on cervical cancer, but also on the HPV vaccination. And she shared with us the global strategy towards the elimination of cervical cancer as a public health problem. And we remember that she highlighted the 3 main objectives, which are the 90%, 70%, and 90%. 70% of girls fully vaccinated by the HPV by 15 years of age, and 70% of women screened with the HPV between 35 and 45 years of age. And 90% of women screened positive received treatment of precancerous lesions and invasive cancer. She also highlighted the challenges related to screening and the HPV vaccine. But most importantly, in her conclusion, she stressed the importance of, first, to strengthen cancer registries and research to inform policy, which is really important. And second is to introduce the HPV vaccination in Gavi eligible countries. In addition to that, she talked about the support that we should provide to implement research to guide the regional adaptation of the global strategy. As we know, we have different contexts and different capacities in our region. On the other side, our dear colleague and friend, Petra, she's the technical advisor in the SRH branch in UNFPA HQ in Geneva Liaison Office, by the way. And she talked about the global perspective on cervical cancer. And she talked about the global burden of cervical cancer. And she pointed out the issue of disparities at the global level, where nearly 90% of the global deaths occur in low and middle income countries. She also highlighted the role of HPV in development of cancers, and mainly the serotypes 16 and 18. And also she concluded with the UN Joint Program on Cervical Cancer Prevention and Control with its 3 pillars. So I think it was a very interesting first session that set the stage, and it opened the discussion for the other sessions. Over to you, Dr. Sawsan.
That is correct, Dr. Shible. And of course, after the keynotes, we had the panels, which was very interactive. And I believe the delegates as well really enjoyed it, because we can see from the chats that they were asking a lot of really interesting questions. Most of them were actually revolving around the vaccine, the HPV vaccine, and the cost effectiveness about it, which was actually tackled in theme 1 in the first panel, where better healthcare, which was titled better healthcare policies for cervical cancer elimination. And that actually was speaking about the prevention. We've proven that prevention is more cost effective than the treatment. And also there was a lot of reflect on United Arab Emirates activity and promoting the HPV vaccine. And also, again, there was another highlight about the WHO Global Strategy 90-70-90. And in the panel 2, under the same theme, where we reflected, myself and your kind self and Dr. Gamal from WHO and Dr. Ziad, reflected on the Sharjah Declaration. And we saw, which was the end result of the first forum back in 2019. And we saw that it's not impossible to have a successful implementation of HPV vaccine, as we saw from UAE experience. And also, we saw that there is lots of funding, that we need to look at lots of funding solutions as well. And also advocacy and capacity building will always play a major role and as cornerstone in whatever we do when we try to do the cervical cancer elimination or actually implement the cervical cancer vaccine, the HPV vaccine. Over to you, Dr. Shible, for theme 2.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sawsan. This is really good. Actually, while you were talking, I was trying to monitor the chat, but actually we received only the good mornings and the hellos and so on. Please, colleagues, feel free to share with us your comments, your questions that we can address during this opening session of day 2. So yesterday, yes, you are right. And the following session was on theme 2, continuum of care in cervical cancer. And we started with the keynote from His Excellency, Dr. Llave, Minister of Health and Prevention. And he pointed out the importance of addressing cervical cancer as a public health concern, as it's the 4th most common cancer among women worldwide, and it's the 3rd in the Arab region. Maybe it's the 6th in the UAE, but UAE was the first country in the region combating cervical cancer. The vaccine coverage rate has reached 82%, which is really amazing, and it's a good practice maybe to be duplicated in our region. Also, he highlighted the need to intensify the regional efforts against cervical cancer. Then we had a very interesting panel moderated by our colleague and friend, Dr. Suleiman Abu Sarwil from Libya. And we had very distinguished speakers in that panel, Dr. Hussein Rand from UAE, Ilyas and Joske from Netherlands, and Dr. Parta from WHO. The subject was how primary healthcare is providing screening, prevention, and access to HPV vaccination under the current COVID-19 pandemic. So Joske provided a general overview of the HPV in Netherlands, where every year 1,000 women get infected and almost 450 die due to cervical cancer, which is still a public health issue. Ilyas from the Dutch Ministry of Health, he highlighted the experience with the rollout of the national strategy. And one of the lessons learned that he highlighted is that health workers need to be engaged early on the process to ensure the buy-in of everyone. Dr. Rand, from his side, he presented the National Cancer Screening Program, and he explained that it has been established to obtain better screening programs, but due to COVID-19, many screening services had to be closed, unfortunately. Dr. Parta shared the impact of COVID on the availability and access, and due to the COVID-19 pandemic as well, they didn't provide the whole spectrum of services, unfortunately. That was followed by a second panel. It was moderated by Dr. Khalid Saleh, and it included Dr. Lamia from UAE, Professor Mohammed Ben Hassou and his colleague Mariam Lamisi from University Mohammed VI from Morocco, and Dr. Lisa Stevens from the IAEA. The subject was how to ensure equity and access in cervical cancer. And I think this is a very important topic as well. As the previous speakers said, there are big disparities and inequities all over the world, but also within the same countries. Dr. Lamia, she shared the experience of Abu Dhabi, where the HPV vaccination started in 2008. Dr. Lisa from IEA explained that the organization has spent over 172 million euros to support cancer-related projects. And then Dr. Mariam with Professor Ben Hassou explained the cervical cancer is ranked second in Morocco for women with very high mortality, which make it a very important topic to be addressed and tackled in the coming years. Over to you, Dr. Sawsan.
Thank you very much, Dr. Shible. I mean, really, it was a very exciting day, and I would like to remind the dear delegates that you can actually find all the session recorded on the platform. So if you want to reflect on any of the session that was mentioned in our recap today, please feel free to do that. So is going to be today's sessions as well. So what are we going to look at forward to for today? Today is a much shorter day than yesterday, but really not less impactful. We have two themes today. We have one theme about social advocacy in cervical cancer, and we have another theme which speaks about the advances and innovation in the ecosystem of cervical cancer elimination. We have two main key speakers. We are very much privileged to have Dr. Gamal Srour, Professor Gamal Srour, who's going to give us some insights about faith, religion, and culture as a driver for cervical cancer elimination. I will be introducing properly Dr. Gamal in a minute, but also our next keynote speaker will be Dr. Mona Saraya from CDC from the USA, and she will speak about the role of technology and knowledge management, especially under the situation of pandemics like COVID-19. Under theme one, we'll have panel one. We're going to speak about voices of patient. And I believe yesterday there was a lot of panelists who spoke about the importance of voice of patients, panelists who came from different walks of life, doctors, researchers. They also emphasized on the voice of patient, which we have a full panel for. And we will be discussing from, it's going to be a very diverse panel, having speakers from the USA, from Egypt, from Philippines, from Kuwait. They're going to all speak about their experiences and the importance of, and how can we learn, and how we can capitalize on the voices of patients. And of course, most importantly, the advocacy role, or how important advocacy role by civil societies. In panel 2, we will be discussing the role of media, and I believe that is very, very important. There was lots of emphasis as well from lots of the speakers yesterday to speak about how media and proper communication can aid in cervical cancer elimination. We have a distinguished speaker actually who is a TV producer from the US, Tamika, which I'm personally looking forward to hearing about her personal experience and journey, and how can media really leverage a good cervical cancer awareness program, but also the elimination strategy as a whole. In theme 4 today, we're going to have our keynote and also a very interactive panel discussion where we're going to speak about technology, innovation, and partnership, and we'll include into it funding resources, because that was something that also was an outcome from yesterday. And this will be led by our colleague at IAA with the partnership with Islamic Development Bank and Direct Aid as well. Really, on behalf of myself and all my colleagues and Dr. Shible, of course, I wish you all an enjoyable day today. I'm looking forward personally to it. And we look forward to hearing from you through the chat. Any comment, any things that you want to highlight. We are looking forward to having this on a every 2-year basis. So we look forward to hearing how we can improve into this. And without further ado, I would like to introduce Professor Gamal Srour, Professor of Obstetrics and Gynaecology, Doctor of the International Islamic Center for Population Studies and Research at Azhar University, who will be leading and opening with the keynote about faith, religion, and culture as a driver for cervical cancer. And after that, my colleague Rhoda will continue the MC for the day. Over to you, Dr. Gamal. Thank you.
I would like to thank the organizing committee for inviting me to this important meeting. The topic is faith, religion, and culture as a driver in cervical cancer elimination. I have no conflict of interest in this presentation. And during the allocated 20 minutes time for this presentation, I'm going to go through the prevalence of cancer cervix and the prevention of cancer cervix, because this is very important information to provide to the religious leader and faith-based organization so that they can build up their religious address to the public and the masses based on credible scientific information. And then we shall deal how the religious leader and faith-based organization can deliver this message to the public in order to eliminate cancer cervix. Cervical cancer is the fourth most common cancer among women globally, and in low-income countries and middle-income countries, and many countries in AMRO region are so. Its incidence is nearly twice as high as it is in high-income countries, and also the death rate is 3 times as high as those in high-income countries. Globally, there are more than 500,000 of women who suffer from cervical cancer every year. And every year, more than 340,000 women would die from cancer cervix, which is even more than the maternal mortality in the whole world. And if we look to the number of cases in our region, AMRO, during the year 2020, according to WHO, it was around 15,000 cases. And if you look to the number of the cases in Europe, which is about 1.5 more than the population of our region, then there were 66,000, which means more than 4 times the number of cases in the AMRO region. And if we look to the estimated deaths in the year 2020 in the AMRO region, it is around 2.8% of the global mortality, while it was only responsible for 2.5% of the total cases. And if you compare this with Europe, where they have around 4 to 5 times the cases of cancer cervix in the Middle East, then we find that the mortality is 9%, which is much lower than the mortality if it was of the same level as mortality in our region. To sum up what I'm saying, that we have 480 million people in EMRO region, but we have 740 million people in Europe, and the number of cases of cervical cancer in our region, 2.5, but they are responsible for 2.8% of the global mortality, while the number of cases in Europe, 11% of the total cases, but the mortality is as low as 9%. If it was of the same level as the Middle East, the East Mediterranean, then it would have been around 14 to 15 times, which shows that we have in our region low prevalence. However, we still have a high mortality from cancer cervix. It is important that the religious leaders and faith-based organizations undergo the cascade, understand the cascade of the cervical cancer. It starts with the sexual intercourse, repeated sexual intercourse with multiple partners through sexually transmitted diseases. They get infection with HPV, the human papillomavirus. And then with this infection, the most of the infection resolve on their own. However, the number of infection, if untreated, or if the woman got repeated infection, then this will proceed to precancerous lesion. And this precancerous lesion, if not treated within 10 to 20 years, then it will develop into cancer cervix. So where can we interfere? Where we can make a difference? We can make a difference if we interfere with vaccination against HPV, with the introduction of vaccination for the girls between the age of 10 to 15. We can also interfere by treatment of the cases so that they don't progress to precancerous lesion. And if they develop to precancerous lesion, then through screening and diagnosis and early treatment, then these cases will be cured. If they were not tagged at this point, then they will progress to cervical cancer again. If we have early detection, then with the early detection and early treatment, the results are far better and the mortality is much less than if we apply a late treatment because we are not screening women for development of cervical cancer. And this information is extremely important for the religious leaders and for the faith-based organization to know before they can formulate their religious address to the public. Cervical cancer is indeed a preventable disease. It is also curable. Even if it develops, it is curable if detected early and treated adequately, provided it is detected early. So it is very important to seek medical treatment or medical advice to diagnose it as early as possible. Cervical cancer is one cancer the world can actually eliminate, and indeed it is time to do so. The Director General of the WHO, Dr. Tedros, in the call to action by WHO in May 2018, indicated that 194 countries collectively resolved to end the needless suffering of women from cancer of the cervix because it is preventable and curable if we detect it early. We already have the necessary tool. We know how to prevent it, but we need to apply the tools which we have. And in the last World Health Assembly, in the middle of the chaos of COVID-19, still the World Health Assembly paid attention to the problem of the cancer cervix and indicated that and adopted a resolution for elimination of cancer cervix and adoption of strategy to make it happen. Indeed, we do know that women suffer from cervical cancer, which is a preventable disease, and indeed this represents a huge injustice to women and their health. In addition to the impact of cervical cancer on the health of women and their sufferings, but also it has an economic effect. It has been shown by WHO that for every $1 spent on the prevention of cervical cancer, $3 to $26 are being saved from women being at work, not being withdrawn from the workforce, or from the benefit which society gets, or the communities and the families gets by saving the women from suffering from cervical cancer. So it is not only a health issue, but also it is an economic issue, which contribute to the continuation of the development of the various nations. And the WHO elimination strategy for cancer cervix, which was adopted on the 17th of 17th of November 2020, indicated that by the year 2030, all countries can achieve 90% HPV vaccination coverage, 70% screening coverage, 90% access to treatment, including pre-cancer treatment and cancer treatment, as well as palliative treatment for advanced cases. And that is the target of the World Health Organization and all the nations by the year 2030 to achieve the Sustainable Millennium Development Goals. So, how can we apply this information with our religious leaders? How can we relay this information? We have to provide them with these facts so that when they formulate their address, when they formulate their Friday addressing, when they formulate their religious classes, when they formulate their information and advice to the public, they are aware of all these. They should be aware that we are dealing with a disease which, if left untreated, it is fatal. And if it is detected early and prevented, then indeed it can be completely preventable. Religious leader and faith-based organization indeed can lead the campaign and advocacy activities to enlighten the public on avoiding irresponsible sexual behavior, utilization of preventive measures, and seeking early diagnosis and treatment. And the religious leader, they have their support in the text of our primary sources of Sharia in the Holy Quran and in the authenticated hadith of the Prophet Muhammad. The Holy Quran has indicated to us that it is not fitting for a believer, whether a man or woman, when a matter has been decided by Allah and His Messenger, to have any option about their decision. So if God tells us that we should as a believer, we should take our precaution to protect our health. So we should do this. Nobody can say anything else, because the Quran tells us that we have to take our precaution to save ourselves from being infected. Also, the Holy Quran has indicated that we should take care of our body and mind throughout life phases and not to expose ourselves to destruction. And the Holy Quran says, and do not throw yourself into destruction. Also, as I mentioned, one of the factors which result in the development and the infection with HPV, multiple sexual partner, sexual intercourse outside marriage, prostitution, etc. The Holy Quran tells us what are the rules in this condition. The Holy Quran says, and do not approach adultery. It is indeed a shameful deed and a very evil way. Also, the Holy Quran tells us that men and women, for keeping away from sin, and promises the reward of chaste men and women. So the Holy Quran encourages us to have the proper sexual behavior and not to commit adultery or extramarital sexual relationships and other. Even the prostitution, the Holy Quran told us that we should not really encourage prostitution, and we should not force even the slave girls at the time when they were slave girls to force them to have prostitution, because it is harmful to their health. Obviously, of course, there are no slaves these days, but it just gives us the meaning that how prostitution should not be encouraged, even for those who take it as a profession. So the message here, which you can get from our primary source of Sharia, including Quran and Hadith, that's early detection and treatment. and the early detection and treatment also because we have the authenticated hadith of the Prophet Muhammad, peace upon him. Servants of Allah seek treatment, for Allah has sent down any illness without sending down its treatment. For every illness there is a treatment, and that's what the authenticated hadith says. The Prophet, peace be upon him, by calling on the servants. If you look at the hadith, it says servants, and by servant, this means all the people, and not solely Muslim, because he sent a clear message on the necessity of treatment and seeking the right medication and medical treatment. The Grand Imam, Professor Dr. Ahmed Taib, the Grand Sheikh of Azhar, says that this message in this authenticated hadith is revolutionary in unveiling the indispensable quality attached to medicine to treat diseases, and equally revolutionary against the pre-Islamic customs when other forms of treatment were being utilized, like delusions, misbeliefs, and harmful traditions. But the Islam, the primary sources of Sharia, had called for the use of modern medicine to alleviate suffering and treatment. So the message which faith-based organization and religious leaders can deliver to the public, being supported by these scientific facts, as well as by the sources from the primary sources of Sharia, whether the Holy Quran or authenticated hadith, as I indicated earlier on. They should encourage the responsible sexual behavior, the availability of prophylactic vaccines, and that girls should be getting their vaccine. They should seek health care as early as possible, and this would result in screening, and by screening, if we diagnose a precancerous lesion, should receive the treatment for precancerous lesion, and if there is cancer, then it will be detected early and treated early, and consequently the outcome would be marvelous. We all know that all the holy religion, including Islam, they desire for mankind no hardship, as it was indicated in the Holy Quran. Allah desires to lighten our burden for man, because we, as human beings, we were created weak, and indeed the primary source of Sharia call to decrease our suffering in this world. And the role of the religious leader alone is not enough, but it has to create an enabling environment where everybody participates: policymakers, healthcare providers, fund donors, all stakeholders. They should participate in the alleviation of sufferings of the human being. We do know that for the early screening, you need a lot of money, you need a lot of facilities, and some of the countries are poor. They cannot afford to provide this. And indeed, it is our duty to encourage them, and it is our duty to have this enabling environment in order to overcome the development of cancer service by the year 2030, and this by indicating the responsible sexual behavior, the call for vaccinations, for the call for seeking medical treatment, the call for early diagnosis, the treatment of precancerous lesions, and also the early detection of cancer service and its treatment before it becomes advanced. It is only in this way that we can reach to elimination of cancer cervix. I repeat this slide, which I had shown earlier on, that the elimination of cancer cervix by the year 2030 will need 90% of the girls should be vaccinated by the HPV vaccine by the age of 15. 70% of women should be screened using high-performance tests by the age of 35 to 45. 90% of women identified with precancerous lesion should receive treatment. 90% of women with invasive cancer should receive treatment. And we just imagine the successful implementation of vaccination, screening, and early treatment could reduce 40% of the new cases of the cervical cancer and 5 million related deaths by the year 2050. Just imagine, you are saving the life of 5 million women from a cancer cervix by taking this simple measure. So is it not this a wonderful religious message which our religious leaders and our faith-based organization can deliver to the public and encourage the people to follow the instructions of Islam based on the credible scientific facts related to the cancer cervix. Thank you very much.
Professor Srour, thank you so much for this very interesting presentation. And I could see in the comments that it's highly appreciated as well with the references to Quran. And thank you so much for presenting on a topic that is so very close to my heart as well.
Thank you.
Yes, there is one question that I would like to ask you that was asked by Ayman Atawid, and he writes, regarding the non-HPV cervical cancer, for example, how best to screen for it? Yes, I think that's what he meant. So how to best screen for the non-HPV cervical cancers?
Well, I think simply by seeking medical treatment, by seeking medical checkup as early as possible, so that if cancer develops or if a precancerous lesion develops, then you can diagnose it early. And if you diagnose early, and then of course the chances of success of the treatment is very high, because if you don't seek regular screening of women, then you are bound to miss cases, whether they are due to HPV virus or they are due to other causes of cervical cancer.
Thank you very much. And maybe allow me to ask you one more question since you are online.
Please go ahead.
Another question in the chat is, as public health professionals, we know that stigma around sexual health issues causes higher rates of disease and challenges. And if we ask religious leaders to share this information to their communities, we can risk causing more stigma among particular vulnerable groups, which in turn have higher rates of HPV and therefore cervical cancer. What would you advise on how to prevent stigma?
Thank you very much for this question. Actually, this is a very, very important question. And we have been faced with this in all our activities to enlighten and to strengthen the religious leader with their messages in sexual reproductive health and the reproductive rights, which we have been doing over the past 40 years. Indeed, when you look to Islam, as a religion, it is one of the most open religions which talked about sexuality and relationship between men and women, between husbands and wife. And in fact, when you go into it, the Islam with its primary sources, whether the Holy Quran or the authenticated hadith, went into the fine details of sexual relationship. And this is the thing. We as a Muslim community had been shying away from talking about sexuality, and consequently we associated sexuality with stigma, which is not so. On the contrary, the proper and sexual behavior indeed is one of the instructions of the Holy Quran and the authenticated hadith. And we have been doing this actually with the religious leader, the imam, with the preachers, male and female preachers, and also the students of Azhar University who come from more than 105 Muslim countries and Muslim communities in different parts, boys and girls. And we talk to them about sexuality, freely about sexuality, and how it should not be associated with stigma, and what are the proper instructions for this. And you will be surprised. These things actually went very smoothly down to these students, whether boys or girls, and they asked open question, and we have had lovely discussion. And at the end of the session, the workshops which we ran in collaboration with UNFPA and WHO and UNICEF, it's amazing. You can see the difference in the attitude and the difference on the knowledge and attitude of these students on sexuality. So please, don't shy away from talking about sexuality. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And indeed, I can confirm that in my work with Christian religious leaders, I saw the same, that they are open for these messages. They just need to have the knowledge and the information to make change within their religious communities.
Absolutely.
That being said, I would like to start with panel one, the Voices of Patients-Focused Organizations and Their Success Stories. This panel will be under the leadership of Heya Mirai, Program Manager of Friends of Cancer Patients in the FOCP, and Dr. Gamal, thank you very much for your thoughts on the role of faith and religions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rhoda, for the introduction. Dear attendees, on behalf of Friends of Cancer Patients, I'd like to thank you for joining the second day of this forum. It is my pleasure and honor to start the first panel of the day. I'll introduce myself and then I'll introduce the charity and then I'll introduce the panelists. My name is Heya Mirai and I'm the program manager here at Friends of Cancer Patients. Friends of Cancer Patients is an NGO. We are based in the Emirate of Sharjah in the United Arab Emirates. We are established since 1999, and the core aim of the charity was to advocate on raising awareness on the early detectables of cancers, breast cancer and cervical cancer, prostate and testicular. We're gathered here today to talk about cervical cancer, and it's my pleasure to be able to participate with several of our attendees and our panelists from all over the world. We will be highlighting the importance of civil societies and social advocacy organization in spreading the awareness and message around cervical cancer and the HPV vaccination. I'm going to start by introducing our first panelist. Our first panelist is Dr. Heather White, who is a global public health specialist. She has 20 years of experience across multiple practice areas, including NCDs, as well as sexual and reproductive health and rights. Her focus includes HPV and cervical cancer prevention. She is currently the executive director of Together for Health, a global partnership focused on bold action and mobilizing the world to end cervical cancer. She is based in the USA and will be sharing this video about the organization.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dr. Heather White. I'm the executive director at Together for Health. Thank you very much to the organizers of this conference, Friends of Cervical Cancer, to allow us to share our story with you from Together. We're very pleased to be on the panel this afternoon. Next slide. Together for Health is a US-based cervical cancer advocacy organization launched in 2017 that works in partnership with several international NGOs that share our vision of a world without cervical cancer. Our partners include the American Cancer Society, Basic Health International, FHI 360, Global Health Labs, JPIGO, PATH, Pathfinder International, Project Concern International, and Population Services International. Together, these partners work in over 30 countries around the world and reach thousands of girls and women annually with life-saving products and services. At Together, we strive to ensure that each of our partners has access to the most up-to-date evidence and science to inform national policy and ensure high-quality services for all of their patients and clients. Next slide. At Together, we take a three-pronged approach to our advocacy work. We like to say we scale up by creating structural change through improved policies based on evidence and practice. We scale out by working through our partners and programs across multiple regions. And we scale deep by amplifying stories to inspire change, which is what we'll share with you all today. Next slide. As an advocacy organization, we know that sharing stories and personal perspectives can drive social change around cervical cancer awareness and care. By amplifying the stories of girls, women, and healthcare providers working on the front lines, we aim to move beyond the statistics and hear directly from those affected by the disease. We can learn from their stories, be inspired, and influence others to take action for their own health and wellness. Today, I want to share with you 3 ways that we use storytelling to influence policy as well as social change around cervical cancer prevention. Next slide. In our Faces of Hope series, which we will share a couple of videos from today, you will meet 2 women, one in India and another in Kenya, who have been directly affected by this disease. We learn how these women are educating themselves, their families, and their communities on the importance of prevention in the form of regular cervical screening and HPV vaccination, and the steps that these communities are taking to fight cervical cancer together. By shining a light on this disease and its toll on these communities, we aim to inspire girls, women, and their families to take the necessary steps towards prevention. Moreover, we want decision makers and leaders to take steps in the form of national commitment for increased funding and capacity for cervical cancer elimination, to also show their commitment through action. These are just some of the photos that we've taken in our 2 campaign series, one that we have created in India and the other we've created in Kenya. And they show patients and survivors, as well as healthcare providers on the front lines and ministry personnel, all coming together to support elimination efforts for this disease. Next slide. In another form of communication or storytelling, this past year, Together for Health decided to launch the Together interview. Due to the impact of COVID-19, in September 2020, we developed and launched an interview series where we invited leaders from partner NGOs, as well as community-based organizations, to share what they are doing to ensure that all girls and women continue to receive essential reproductive health services, including cancer care. To date, we have interviewed 13 global health leaders, community activists, and scientists. These interviews can be found on our website, togetherforhealth.org. I invite you to read them and be inspired by the community of practice that is driving change, even in the face of COVID-19. Finally, next slide. I want to share with you that at Together for Health, we are currently developing a communications campaign in Kenya that we will launch later this year to inspire and influence female leaders and decision makers to vocalize their support for cervical cancer prevention and treatment in their communities. We are partnering with Scope Impact in Kenya to use a human-centered design approach to build and promote a campaign with and for Kenyan women to inspire one another to take up these critical preventive services. This is more than just sharing knowledge. It will focus on engaging and educating local media outlets on the issue so that they can speak to the issue of cervical cancer more completely. It is also about creating an intergenerational dialogue around cervical cancer prevention so that girls and women become more comfortable talking about prevention together. Unfortunately, we know that in Kenya and in many parts of the world, cancer, and especially HPV and cervical cancer, is stigmatized in many communities. It is only by talking about the issue, relaying the science, and listening to these brave girls and women share their stories that we can begin to transform the conversation and slowly change health behaviors across society to ultimately reach more women and girls. Next slide. If you're interested in learning more about our work and how you can get involved, please reach out to me directly or through our website at Together for Health. Thank you.
We would like to thank Dr. Heather for her presentation. And it was interesting that this is the second time people talk about how educating media outlet is very important, and we will see it in the next panel actually. So it's a very interesting topic that I'm very excited to hear about. For now, let's welcome our second panelist, Mrs. Hanaa Serry. She is the Secretary of Board of Directors at Baheya. She heads up the Board of Strategic Management Office and aims to support in setting Baheya strategy in its coming milestones, targeting supporting women medically, socially, and financially in Egypt. Mrs. Hanaa, you may start.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me quite well? And is my slides?
Yes, we can.
Yes, okay. I'm glad to be here and join you in your second cervical forum. As you know, we'll just give a brief about Baheya. Baheya Foundation is named after Mrs. Baheya Wahbi, who is a lady from a prominent Egyptian family. Who suffered from cancer herself back in the 1990s and losing her battle. While receiving treatment, her family actually noticed the amount of suffering women from low-income families go through. Being unable to afford the treatment, they then decided to convert her house into a charity hospital, supporting women specialized in early detection and treatment for women diagnosed with breast cancer for free. Baheya Foundation actually, I was just trying to start my video. Okay, Baheya Foundation actually focuses on providing optimal healthcare to women using a patient-centered multidisciplinary approach through excellence in awareness and early detection, since we believe that they're key to cancer control, as well as treatment, education, and research. Since its inauguration in 2015 till today, Baheya Foundation has been able to deliver a total of around 450 awareness sessions with around 21,000 attendees, women attendees across all of Egypt. Baheya as well has been able to perform early detection for breast cancer to more than 140,000 women now, and treatment to diagnosed breast cancer women, as well as deliver psychological support, therapy sessions, group activities, and support groups. Baheya as well delivers training to undergrads and postgraduates, medical and pharmaceutical and science students. With public, and we have as well Baheya Research Center, which has published research papers by our doctors. Last year, of course, due to a COVID challenge, Baheya was able to resume the treatment of the fighters safely, taking the necessary precautions, and we are resuming to do so. Of course, early detection was impacted during the first months of the pandemic, but taking the necessary precautions, we were able to resume the early detection screenings, providing online psychological support sessions, online awareness sessions, and virtual training sessions. Baheya's vision for the coming period is to be the destination for women's health and safety. We're aiming to do that through our new project of extended scope, our hospital, which provides integrated early detection and treatment medical services, supporting the, women and providing all the women with the latest methods of prevention and treatment. It's planned to start operation, hopefully in less than 2 years, to accommodate around 550,000 women annually. So this is the short journey of Baheya so far, and we're aiming to do more for women, of course, accommodating during its extended scope cervical cancer, which we are aiming to have it in the second phase of our new hospital, inshallah. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Hanaa, for the lovely introduction to Baheya and all the great efforts that you guys have been offering. We will move to our third panelist. Let's welcome Dr. Cecilia. She is a gynecological oncologist who is presently the Gibecco affiliate of Johns Hopkins University Technical Advisor for the Success, which is Scale Up Cervical Cancer Elimination with Secondary Prevention Strategies program in the Philippines. She is also a professor at the University of Philippines and is the first woman former chair of the Cancer Institute of the university. She also continues her efforts in the scene of advocacy for cervical cancer elimination as the chair of the Cervical Cancer Prevention Network in the Philippines, who pushes for educating women to save lives. Dr. Cecilia?
Can I repeat? I'm trying to share.
Yes, it's showing. Just if
It's
you would
showing,
just, yeah.
but there is no, wait a minute. Okay, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yes,
Ms. Cecilia, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you very
However,
much.
the slides which you're sharing right now is on the smaller mode. I would request you to share the full screen mode again. You can stop sharing and you can reshare the screen.
Okay, stop sharing.
Now
And,
reshare it with the full screen.
aha, where is it? Share.
Okay. The full screen, the screen 2.
Screen 2. Is this the one?
It's loading. Yes, this is the one. You can start with your presentation now.
Thank you very much for such kind introduction. Good afternoon or good morning, everyone. First of all, I'd like to thank the organizing committee for the honor and pleasure to be able to speak to you about the voices of patients and families, focusing on the organization's success story. I'd like to commend the previous speaker because it makes it easy for me to present this topic on the voices of patients and families. So when you talk about voices and the power of hearing the voice, it projects what you really feel. It opens up one's opinion and struggles, opens infinite possibilities. So when someone listens and feels what we express, they make us feel good. If sick, we feel well if someone understands us. And the voice is very, very important in expressing the patient's experience. So what is the patient experience? Actually, the patient experience is an interaction shaped by one's organizational culture or the people around us. It's influenced by our perceptions across the continuum of care. When you talk about the voice of patient's experience, you do not only talk of the value of a spoken word, but also the unspoken needs of the patients. So when people hear and listen, we feel good and we can express and feel understood. If we are sick, it makes us feel someone sympathizes or uplifts our spirit, and the good feeling boosters one's spiritual immune system. This immunity improves our well-being and our healing. So the voice is very important. A lot of times our patients are very shy, and when they're very sick, they lost their confidence, they don't want to speak. And there are several organizations in our country, and a few of them are focused mainly on cervical cancer. We have this group, ILEAVE, and it is a group of cervical cancer survivors with their families and support. You're coming together to share, support, bond, and advocate that there is life in spite of cancer. Through that friendship, they're able to encourage sharing their problems, And through sharing, they're able to note how important it is for them to spread awareness on cervical cancer prevention. The latest program that they had was a collaboration with the Australian Cervical Cancer Foundation with a teaching video to teach the people in the Philippines regarding prevention and screening and early cancer detection. The other group you call Kabalikat Success Story is a group of patients in one of the biggest hospitals which take care of pelvic cancer. So what they do, they dance together, sing together, share stories, perform, and seek support of their problems. So you may be looking at it that maybe this just to look good, feel good. However, we're able to see that with this kind of camaraderie that they are looking into, they learn to open up. Most of the patients who are sick, they want to be close. They don't want to talk about it. So this stories about the civil society groups is creating a lot of impact in the women because they're able to learn to open up. And we know that doctors are often busy with their multiple responsibilities and priorities. They lose their ability to really listen to the patients and the families. But nowadays, our patients and families are no longer receivers of care offered by providers, but they should be engaged in the shift from passive recipient to active participant as partners. Information campaigns and advocacies of the civil societies that encourage patients to talk, express their fears, and discuss their problems, not only to their peers, but also to their own doctors. And we know that it's important for patients to be able to express their fears and what they fear or what they expect from the doctors because they should be part of the decision making of the treatment that has to be given to them, knowing that this is their body. So next is what is the effect of the pandemic? We know that there's a decrease actually in the number of cases going to the hospitals because the patients and the families feared because of the risk of having COVID. So for symptoms, we usually have virtual consult. If there's no emergency, the doctors do not advise face-to-face consultation. So what the patients does now is to call all their friends, the club members, share their feelings. They connect in Facebook, in virtual calls, but no face-to-face. So even if the pandemic had really affected the treatment of our patients, we see that we can still continue information campaign through the virtual conferences. And this is very important that they have someone who will listen to them. Listening to the voice of the patients and the families make one uplift the spirit that boosters immunity for well-being and healing. And I'd like to point out a quote from Malu, which says, "I've learned that people will forget what you said. People will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel." So it's now important for our cancer patients to feel that they have a friend who will listen to them and uplift their spirit so that they will be well and healing. With that, good afternoon, and thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, Dr. Cecilia, for the wonderful presentation and showing us all the efforts that has been done in the Philippines. I've actually attended one of your online cervical cancer debates during the lockdown. So it was very interesting to see how active you guys were. And you raised a very important lesson, is that when doctors are usually busy seeing a lot of patients, they don't give that much time for the patients. So the civil society's role bridge that gap between the patients and the families to be allowed to talk in the open. And that's a very important message that civil societies do and put out. I would like to also introduce now our fourth and final panelist, Dr. Nashwa Abdelaziz. She is a specialist in gynecology, oncologist in the Kuwait Cancer Control Center. She has over 30 years of experience in the field of radiation oncology and over 20 years experience in the management of cancer cervix. And she will be representing on behalf of the Federation of Gulf Cancer Control. Dr. Nashwa, please.
It's my pleasure to give me the opportunity to be with you today. I think after this previous very fruitful presentation, I will not add too much, but as a whole, this is an idea about the Gulf country population and plus Yemen. And as you can see here, in Yemen it's 29 million almost, and in Kuwait it's 4 million 2070 person. And regarding the expats in Gulf area, the highest expats in Gulf area are in Saudi Arabia, which about 10 million, followed by United Arab Emirates, 8 million, and in Kuwait, it's about 2 million, which account about 2/2 of the population. The number of cases of cancer cervix over 5 years age standardized incidence rate per 100,000 women for the 3 period of diagnosis from 1998-2002 in Kuwait it was 4.9, and in 2007 it was 7.3. In 2012 it was 5.3. It was 2.6. As it was mentioned by Dr. Gamal, cervical cancer is the fourth most common cancer in women worldwide, and it has the fourth highest mortality rate among cancer in women. Most cases of cervical cancer are preventable by routine screening and by treatment of precancerous lesion. As a result, most of the cervical cancer cases are diagnosed in women who live in regions with inadequate screening protocols. The estimated new cases in the United States is about 14,000 cases, and in death is about 4,000 cases, according to American Cancer Society Facts 2020. In Gulf area, cervical cancer is the 10th most common cancer in Gulf area. An estimated 273 cases deaths occurred in 2002, accounting to about 9% of all cancer deaths in women. Between January 1998 and December 2004, there were 1,297 cervical cancer cases reported from all Gulf area, and accounted to 2.2% from all cancer and 4.3% from cancers among females. In Gulf area, in Qatar, highest incidence of cervical cancer, the ASR is the highest 6.8, followed by Bahrain 5.9, and in Kuwait it's 4.8. In Gulf country, the ASR in 2009 was 2.4 in Kuwait, and it was 2.8 in 2012 compared to 3.5 in 2017. For cervical cancer, to decrease the incidence of cervical cancer, we need 3 main steps: awareness, prevention, and screening. And actually, Dr. Gamal covered a very big part of this slide. Mainly awareness, mainly handled by NGO. In Kuwait, CAN campaign is a Gulf model for early detection and cancer awareness. Awareness should be for public and healthcare provider. What to aware healthcare providers and public about the risk factor, which increases with age, is the most important risk factor for most cancer. The primary risk factor for cervical cancer is HPV, as we all know, high parity, smoking cigarette, and HIV infection, long-term of use of oral contraceptive pills. However, it's in some data, it's not conclusive. Immunosuppression, And the sign and symptom, and regarding awareness of sign or symptom of cervical cancer, which can be vaginal bleeding, unusual vaginal discharge, pelvic pain, dyspareunia, postcoital bleeding, for healthcare provider to be an alarm for them to refer the patient to the proper channel for proper diagnosis, avoid negligence of the symptom for early diagnosis. So for diagnosis and HPV testing, cervical cytology with pap smear has been the mainstay of cervical cancer screening since its introduction. Current screening options include either cytology alone with the use of pap smear, cytology and HPV testing, persistent infection with oncogenic type of HPV, such as HPV 16 and 18, is associated with the development of cervical cancer. The HPV test is most often used in two situations. The American Cancer Society recommends the primary HPV test as the preferred test for cervical cancer screening for people 25 to 65 years of age. Because a primary HPV test may not be an option everywhere, a co-test every 5 years or a pap test every 3 years are still a good option. Regarding the prevention, should include avoid the risk factor to decrease the risk of cancer cervix, and vaccination, which is not implemented in many countries, to minimize against HPV infection and offer a primary prevention strategy for cervical cancer. And is it cost effective? Of course, because saving life of women and subsequent family problem should be a cost effective. And there is some study from England and from other countries, from US, and they found that cancer vaccination decreased the risk of cancer cervix and increased the risk of HPV infection. Regarding the prognosis of cancer cervix, there are patient-related factors, which can be either the age and performance status and disease-related factors. And regarding the performance status, the earlier the stage is the better, because it can give the patient the option of early surgery, for example, and avoid the risk of toxicity of further treatment required like radiotherapy and chemotherapy. And these related factors like tumor size, tumor stage, presence or absence of lymph nodes, and all these are very important impact on prognosis and survival of patients with cancer cervix, and which can be as high as more than 90% for early stage, and can drop up to 25 to 30% for advanced stage and stage 4 disease. Regarding HIV status, women with HIV have more aggressive and advanced disease and a poorer prognosis. 2 studies have shown a worse outcome when HPV was identified in cervical cancer of patients undergoing radical hysterectomy and pelvic lymphadenectomy. Screening by pap smear include, there is no recommendation for our area to do a national screening program, and we advise opportunistic program. However, the WHO currently conducting a comparable estimate for cervical cancer screening coverage to introduce a global and regional standardized estimate for cervical cancer screening for women 30 to 49 years. And in 2019, there was 64,000 women have been screened for cervical cancer in Kuwait over 1 year, and over last 5 years, 116,000 women have been screened. Cancer service and COVID-19. At the onset of COVID-19 pandemic, cancer screening were legally put on hold and presented an additional challenge to cancer cervix screening. And in many studies, in some study from UK and US, found there is decreased screening in many during COVID crisis, had impact on increase the number of cancer cervix cases, either lost screening or lost vaccination. Self-sample HPV testing by trained provider or women themselves is a promising alternative to clinic-based screening during the pandemic, depend on many factors. This is just some of our campaign and participation in many screening awareness for the population healthcare provider for many cancer, either breast cancer, prostate cancer, and we have some also workshop for prostate cancer for some women to learn them how to do self-breast examination. Take-home message, focus on developing screening and an early diagnosis national cancer control plan. These are most likely to have the greatest impact. Awareness for screening, vaccination, and early detection can be promoted by raising awareness among the general public and the healthcare providers. Investment in training of the primary care physicians in examination, proper referral plan, and arranging a multidisciplinary management. We need data on incidents of infection in the community and monitoring of existing opportunistic screening program. Awareness about HPV vaccination, its cost effectiveness. Cervical cancer screening plan in Gulf countries. WHO recommended HPV testing for all women aged 3 years and above. Decision about screening depend on many factors and requires careful consideration of risk and benefit and ensuring safety for both patient and healthcare personnel. Keep in mind a message for our publics, the concept of face your fears and keep calm. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nashwa, for a great presentation and giving us an idea on the cancer around the Gulf and the efforts that you guys have been doing in Kuwait. We're just going to ask a couple of questions that we have received. The first question is, how do you counsel a patient who is unwillingly to practice safe sexual activity and take vaccine for cervical cancer? What type of lifestyle and diet is recommended for cervical cancer prevention? I think these are two different questions. So the first question, let's go with, how do you counsel a patient who is unwillingly to take the vaccine and also unwillingly to practice safe sexual activity? I open the floor for discussion. Whoever wants to answer this question, please go ahead.
Yeah.
Oh, so Haya, can I start with
yeah, Dr. Cecilia, let's go, and then we'll go to Dr. Nashwa.
Well, sometimes it's really difficult that some patients will not be cooperative, especially if they don't want to have any form of screening or any vaccination or any treatment. But the thing is, we need to have a lot of patients, and we need a lot of, it may not be, the first time you counsel them may not be enough. It has to be constant counseling. So it's something like you have to create some sort of friendship before they will even accept what you are telling them to do. And that's where your civil society organizations can come in. If you create bonding and friendship by having events that will make them feel good and comfortable so that they will not be inhibited, then you create that kind of friendship where you can talk to her and convince her later on. So really sometimes it's difficult, but you cannot force any patient to do what she doesn't want. So you have to have a way of making friendship. That's for if there's some difficulty in them to accept what you're advising. Thank you. Over to you, Haya.
Thank you, Dr. Cecilia, for that point. And I think it's very important to establish credibility within your society. And this is a great role that has been done by different civil societies across the region, and as we've seen today throughout our presentations. I think the second question we could ask Dr. Nashwa, which is, what type of lifestyle and diet is recommended for cervical cancer prevention?
Actually, as other cancer, should be healthy diet. And for example, any diet full of antioxidant, berries is good for either breast or cervical cancer. Even there are some studies now that about berries seeds for pure berry seed for prevention of cancer cervix. Also, good lifestyle, exercise, and the most important is the self-hygiene and avoid infection. Also, it's very important to avoid, because chronic infection and inflammation is It's one of the most important factors for developing cancer cervix.
Thank you, Dr. Nashwa, for that answer. And I hope that answers the question that was asked. Mrs. Hanaa, let's give you this question. During the COVID-19, which has affected most civil society's work across the world, because we work very effectively with the community, and that's how we usually raise our awareness. And that credibility between both of us. How did that affect your efforts for that year, and how will it be for this year? What do you guys envision it looking like, and how will you continue raising the awareness?
As I said in my presentation, actually we suffered the first 3 months, I think, of the pandemic. We had to stop the early detection and focus on the treatment of our current fighters to resume delivering them their treatment. Even for the fighters, because they were at the high risk taking their chemo sessions, we provided the services to pick them up from their homes, and so that they can avoid actually taking public transportations. For the hormonal treatment, we delivered their treatment actually all over Egypt with our sponsors, just to protect them from having to come all over the place. For the follow-ups, we had to switch to video calls between the doctors, and whenever they see that they have to come, of course, they came for consultations. We have learned actually the first 3 months it was really difficult, but now we're doing more for the digital transformation, taking the precautions. We provided all our fighters with protection equipment to take care of themselves. We have created vital signs units in the place to ensure that anyone who's coming in is really in good health and she can come in to avoid any kind of infections. And we'll resume to do that. Actually, mainly our concern is the awareness, because it's as well the main thing concerning women, because still breast cancer is a womanly thing that we always suffer women talking about in public. Let me tell you just an example about starting the awareness session since the beginning of Baheya. The first 2 years, 2015 and 2016, we only held like 40 sessions with very low attendees. And then in 2017, we had 20 sessions only on its own. 2018, we held like 90 with more, like 4,000 attendees. And then it's increased till we reached that. Last year, it was the first time that we held online awareness sessions. We still know that not everyone in Egypt can really attend online, and this is one of the challenges, but we still are trying to do it. We're still trying to limit the attendees in any physical session, so that we can ensure the physical distancing and everything. But we have to do that. We have to resume. Cancer, of course, is going to be impacted due to COVID if we stop our progress with the awareness and the treatment.
Thank you, Mrs. Hanaa, for that question. And I think for that answer. And I think it's a very important relation, because as we've seen yesterday, a lot of the ministries of health's focuses have shifted from the regular awareness around cancer and so on to fighting this pandemic. And it is our role as civil societies to pick up, that gap and continue spreading the message. Because if the topic of cancer is not highlighted, it will just show in the future how it's going to grow the incidence rate. One more question we've received is if there's an interplay with HPV and any other viral infections, including COVID-19. Please feel free. I think Dr. Nashwa, you would be able to answer this question.
Yes, can you repeat the question again, please?
If there's any correlation between HPV and any other viral infections, including COVID-19.
Yes, of course. It's cancer cervix is one of the cancers that's known to be associated with HIV infection, and because of it can cause immunosuppression, and also, as Dr. Gamal mentioned before, because of multiple sexual partners. So there is strong association between cancer cervix, and HIV infection. And regarding COVID vaccine, there is still no enough data about that because we don't know. There is still, it's still in the beginning of this era. Hopefully, it will be over soon, and after that, we can check the data as an indicator for is COVID-19 predisposed to cancer cervix or not, because we don't know its effect on the immunity. It's still too early to mention about this.
Thank you, Dr. Nashwa, for that. And as our session comes to end, I would like to thank all the panelists for taking their time to join us today to talk about the important role of civil societies and patient-focused organizations in their efforts to continue talking about cervical cancer and the importance of HPV. Thank you all, and hopefully we'll see you soon. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Heya, and indeed.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much, Heya. You know, sometimes when we talk about cervical cancer, we are so focused on the disease and what to do to prevent it that we may forget the voices of the patients. And so, as the first speaker said, definitely sharing the personal stories, they can be drivers of change, and it should be patient focused in all the activities that we are developing to prevent and to treat cervical cancer. Thank you so much, Heya. Thank you so much to all the panelists. And with that, I'd also like to introduce our second panel for today on how can media support proper communication to create impactful messaging, which will happen under the leadership of my colleague, Samir Al-Darabi, Regional Communication Advisor of UNFPA Arab States Regional Office. Samir, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, dear Uday, and welcome to everyone. Thank you all for being with us, and I'm honored and thrilled to be asked to moderate this session. How can media support proper communications to create impactful messaging? This is really very crucial to the global efforts to accelerate action on HPV and cervical cancer. Communications affects perceptions and behaviors. And with it is also, these behaviors was related to health for sure. It is associated with the extent of health information seeking and the practice of preventive behavior. We all agree that awareness and information sharing on cancer has decreased the number of survivors dramatically. Has increased the number of survivors dramatically. But also we need to admit that reporting on health issues, including cancers in our region, still limited. We also suffer from the lack of that much health information available to the public. And when there is availability of that information, it's usually not that clear enough to the whole public. So my dear colleagues and experts who are joining us in this session will help us to answer one question. How can media support proper communications to create impactful messaging? And the focus will be, as we said, on HPV and cervical cancer. Let me introduce first our first panelist, Dr. Ibrahim Kardani, freelance health and media expert. He's a professor in mental health at Alexandria University, former World Health Organization regional spokesperson during the bird flu and the swine flu outbreaks. And this is very important, him being at that time speaking on behalf of the World Health Organization, trying to put the strategies to reach out to the public and also to ensure the credibility of the information sharing. This is very important, and being a journalist. Dr. Ibrahim Kardani also served with UNICEF Egypt for about 14 years, responsible for many head of the health and nutrition, immunization, polio reduction, and HIV/AIDS. Dr. Ibrahim Al-Kardani, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Samir. Can you hear me?
Yes, we do.
I would really like to start off by thanking Her Excellency Sheikh Al-Jawahir bin Mohammed Al-Qasimi, UNFPA, and all the partners for convening this virtual conference on cervical cancer. Media-wise, a very sensitive topic. I think it is excellent so far. Frankly, I thought I would hate it. Being a communication person, I always prefer face-to-face communication. But well, thanks to COVID, we're here. In our region, I'd like to hail the efforts of the United Arab Emirates for their comprehensive approach, screening, vaccination, and treatment, and how they went about it. Frankly, I always try to put myself in a decision maker's place, especially if media will be involved. If I were approached to fully support a program such as cervical cancer elimination, I would probably have some questions to ask. It is best to approach the decision makers with a good, concise advocacy paper. They usually don't have the time to listen or to read too much. But the questions they would ask is, how big is the problem? How many people die of it? What age group is affected? Do we have the data? If we don't have the data, how do we go about collecting the data? Is there an available vaccine? Is it produced in sufficient amounts? What temperature should the vaccine be in? How many doses and how far apart? Do we give this vaccine in a school setting, which would require a certain type of campaign, or do we ask the people to come to the centers? How is the vaccine given? Is it by syringes? There we may have a problem, of course, because syringes, when it's a campaign, I remember during measles vaccine, we used to have roomfuls of vaccine, and some of the health workers would want to reuse them. So how do we get rid of them appropriately? It's very important. How costly is the vaccine? Is my country among the low-income countries to merit the Gavi $4.5 per dose? Or am I a middle-income country and I would have to go for more expensive vaccines? How much is that? What are the cost implications? Where are the vaccines that are approved by WHO produced? Is it possible to produce them within our country? A country like Egypt may want to produce in order to export. It might be a plus to introduce the mass campaigns. What are the available communication channels in my country and who controls them? And finally, you may ask, what is the return? What is the return? We all know that ministers and mass media are inundated with COVID-19 vaccines at the moment, and how to give them and where to bring them from and who will get them. So the problem of vaccines isn't as easy as it may sound. However, we have a lot of selling points. What are they? It is the third most common female cancer in half of our region's states. If no action is taken, they're expected to rise from 15,000 to over 30,000 by the year 2040. And already we know that strategies have been set concerning coverage to reach with the vaccine 90% of the girls by 50, early detection, 70% to be screened. 90% of women receive treatment and palliative care. Please here, let's always be concerned of how the women react when they hear, their mental health, the psychological effect it may have on them. And another thing that is a plus is the issue is being raised globally and regionally. Despite COVID-19, it did not stop it. There was the 218, the Global Stakeholders Meeting, 219, Development of a Global Strategy, June 2020. The Vaccine Summit held virtually in Great Britain is Gavi's third investment conference to raise 7.4 billion by the next 5 years. 50 countries were invited and 25 heads of state. And of course, in our region, the Sharjah Declaration. And today, now bringing together all these distinguished stakeholders. So the stage has really been set to do something. However, there are many impediments. What are they? The prevalence and incidence in this region is relatively low. Is there a need to do something, or do we select particular countries as needed? The socio-cultural aspect. Since the infection is mainly transmitted by sexual intercourse, it makes the challenge much bigger. However, on a plus side, HIV/AIDS is the same, and it has been tackled. It has been previously addressed. The important aspect is how to introduce the topic, possibly in a biology class as part of the curriculum when discussing reproductive health. And there's no need to call it sex education, call it in biology. We could also introduce lifestyle modifications, delaying the age of the first sexual intercourse. A study has shown that the first sexual exposure to women in Nigeria, for example, is 16.7 and 17.9, the final year of high school. And sexually active females in universities represent 71% and 81%. Also, teach them to avoid multiple sexual partners, avoid unprotected premarital sex, avoid having more than 4 babies, and avoid tobacco smoking. All these can be introduced in the curriculum, which makes it easier for kids to assimilate. Another thing is the availability of sufficient quantities of vaccine prior to any communication effort, and training of health personnel. Believe me, it takes a lot of work. I've been involved with UNICEF in training, in cold chain training, in nurses and doctors being involved. But to date, Gavi has helped 30 countries introduce HPV vaccine demonstration programs. 19 have successfully introduced them nationally, and 5 others, Malawi, Tanzania, Uganda, Zimbabwe, and Zambia, are among the highest cervical cancer burden in the world. Gavi has introduced in them. Before I leave, I would like to leave you with a thought, a suggestion to think about. HIV is mainly contracted by sexual intercourse. And since this is a taboo topic in many countries, we can use family planning as an entry point, and we have UNFPA on the lead here. Have media campaigns to make men more responsible and not leave the contraceptive burden on women alone. More latex condoms to be available and accessible everywhere. This would not only decrease the number of children in countries like Egypt and Nigeria, but it would definitely help lower the incidence of HPV, HIV, and other sexually transmitted diseases. And it is much less costly to implement. I want to end up by saying, a lot has been done, a lot needs to be done. We can do it by uniting together, NGOs, private sector, and of course, the UN agencies, UNFPA, WHO, UNICEF, as well, of course, the lead will always be the Ministry of Health. I've even taken the effort to print this as well to make it part, but I couldn't hang it behind me. It's up there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ibrahim. That's very impressive. And well, there will be a discussion with you and answers to you. But you know what? I will take the discussion. We'll have the questions and we'll discuss more with you about your presentation. But second, I'll move to our second panelist for today. We have Tamika Felder. Tamika is on a mission to eradicate cancer, advocate for the patient voice in healthcare, and mobilize others to live life with purpose, whatever their obstacle. Tamika is an award-winning television producer, author, blogger, international speaker, mentor, cancer survivor, and patient advocate. Tamika, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for having me. I've enjoyed this discussion, and I am so passionate about cervical cancer and happy to be able to share my unique perspective, not only as a patient advocate, but as someone who was actually diagnosed with cervical cancer. So I was diagnosed with cervical cancer in 2001 at the age of 25. And, my story is that I wasn't getting screened. So vaccination is incredibly important because we want to prevent cancer, but we also know that we need more people to get screened. And screening is invasive, it's uncomfortable, but we have to encourage women to get screened because we know we can prevent cervical cancer. I love the discussions that have been happening, and more of these discussions have to happen. So thank you all so much. As someone directly impacted by this disease, it is incredibly meaningful. For me, it's been a journey. Diagnosed at 25, followed by a radical hysterectomy, chemotherapy, radiation therapy. And thanks to God, I did not lose my life, but I lost my fertility. I am unable to have children because of my diagnosis of cervical cancer, and it has changed the trajectory of my life forever. A way that I have healed from my cancer is what I give back to the world. What I realized is that my legacy will not be the lives that I bring into this world, but my legacy will be the lives that I save. And what's important, and I love the previous panel talking about the success of patient power and patient organizations and the importance of having patient voices. In 2001, when I was diagnosed, there wasn't really a lot for patients. And because of the stigma and shame of cervical cancer, a lot of patients, even now, I'll be celebrating 20 years cancer-free, thanks to God, this year. And there is still a heavy burden of shame and stigma that surrounds cervical cancer. But my mission is to get more people talking. Because of my background as a television producer, I have that unique lens of also helping people share their stories. So I empower patients through our survivor school and our survivor network to help them share their stories, and learning how to partner with the media, how to share their stories, to spread our advocacy footprint, to get our messages out there to ultimately help end cervical cancer. So our advocacy training is through our survivor school. And pre-COVID, we met in person for a few days, usually 2.5 days. And we have people who come from across the country in the US, but we also have people who've attended from other parts of the world. We will be doing Survivor School virtually this year. So I asked your help in making sure that we identify women who could participate in our Survivor School so that we train them. And they already know their story, but they don't know the power of their story. They don't know how meaningful it is for them to be able to partner with many of the doctors and researchers and organizations here to share their stories. We know that personal impact stories bring it all to life. And so in our trainings, not only do we teach them what parts of their story to share, but we teach them what parts of the science they need to share while sharing their stories. And that means also being comfortable sharing their stories and being comfortable reaching out to the media. As an organization, we do reach out to media on behalf, but we also get a lot of requests from the media. But we want our patients, cervical cancer patients and survivors who are in their regions, countries, reaching out actively to the media. And we found a lot of success that way, because not everyone is talking about cervical cancer, or they're not talking about cervical cancer in the lens that we want them to talk about. We want them to show the realities of what it's like to be diagnosed with cervical cancer and what women go through. There is this portrayal of what someone with cervical cancer looks like, or a misnomer of what type of life they led. And we know that cervical cancer can happen to anyone. It doesn't matter how rich you are, how poor you are. And yes, people who are on the lower economic spectrum do get diagnosed, but we've seen this happen across the board to all women. Cancer is a gift wrapped in barbed wire. It's a gift because I know that I have to make my survivorship count. I survived. Not everyone survives. Cancer also reminds you of life and how meaningful it is and how wonderful it is. I get to wake up in 2 hours here, the sun will probably rise, and I get to see it. Not everyone who gets diagnosed with cervical cancer survives it. And I think a lot of people think cervical cancer is an easy cancer, and that, you just get a quick, easy surgery and then you're done with it. For us who have been diagnosed with cervical cancer, we know that that is not the case. We want to inspire, we want to empower, we want to engage our community. A big part of that is through leadership. We also mentor, we help them grow as patient advocates. When you attend a survivor school, we just don't let them go. We have monthly meetings where we continue educating them about what are the latest guidelines, what are the latest numbers that they need to know, what are the parts of their story that they need to tweak. We also hold them accountable. This month is Cervical Cancer Awareness Month. Have you reached out to media? And also recognizing that there are different forms of media, not just traditional broadcast and print media, but also looking at podcasts, looking at blogs, looking at tweet chats. There are many ways to interact with the media to get one story out there. A lot of YouTube channels, different things like that. We want those who are in our network to share their stories in meaningful ways. How do we identify advocates? A lot of times people want to know how we do that. A lot of times it's by word of mouth. People find out about us. We have many wonderful partner organizations that we work with who are all doing this work. We know that we are stronger together. We know that online burnout is inevitable, especially in this era of COVID, where many of us are working from home and trying to navigate, helping our children with virtual school, and also making sure that we do our part for the causes that we care about. So we take in consideration online burnout. For example, our advocates, we still need them to advocate in February because we know we have to talk about cervical cancer 365 days of the year, but we did an extra push in January. So we want them to be very mindful, but we also like for them to look at a hook. For in the US, February is also Black History Month. So we want our patient advocates of color to reach out and share their stories. So we're doing that push right now. We know Cervical Cancer Awareness Month is getting ready to end. But if you didn't get a hook or you've made a connection, now is the time to reach back out to the media to let them know, like, hey, we're still talking about cervical cancer. Maybe, I focus on the survivorship part of my story, or maybe I focus on the health disparities this month, and that's the media hook to align yourself to get the story and the cause back out there again. A lot of times I don't think patients realize that they have a story that needs to be heard. I think they overwhelmingly think, why would anyone want to hear my story? Or maybe my story wasn't as difficult as another story that I've seen somewhere, or I don't know how to share my story. So we help them develop their story and share their story and understand the unique power that they have by sharing their story, and that there is someone that needs to hear their story, that there is someone who hasn't been screened. There's someone who is contemplating the vaccine, but they're unsure because of things they've seen online. And their one single story may be the catalyst for that change. I understand uniquely now that ending cervical cancer is within our reach, with all the wonderful people here on this call and beyond who are working to do this work. We have to share our stories as patient advocates to bring that data to life. We teach them that their story can share knowledge, reduce myths and misunderstandings, educate, mobilize, organize, empower others, and create a platform for change. People talk about breast cancer now. There was once a time when they didn't talk about breast cancer. As patient advocates, we can help create that platform for change where people are talking about cervical cancer. Together, we know we can make a greater impact. We show the diversity that is within our communities. We work hard to make sure that we show the many faces of cervical cancer. And we know that we can do more, and we strive every single day to do more. Powerful storytellers know engagement matters. You have to create an unforgettable experience. You can't be a know-it-all. We tell them we don't have to know all the medical stuff. That's what the doctors are for, but we have to have basic knowledge. We're the bridge between the science and the actual impersonal impact story of cervical cancer. As patients, we have to be authentic and vulnerable, but we also have to look for the future and trust the science. But recognize your limits, know what you're willing to talk about and what you can't. And that's for clinicians, organizers, community researchers, anyone, but especially patients. We also, when we're working with the media, you have to make it meaningful. We pour our whole heart into our messaging. Dr. Noel Brewer, who is a researcher who does a lot of work, he said this one day, and it really resonated with me. And he's made sure to use our videos and share our patient stories. He said, we gave the data, but we didn't tell the story. It's up to patient advocates to tell the story. And with partnering with media, it's how we get the story out there even further. Survivor is a partner. Look at us as a resource. Look at us as a tool to help you spread the science. We want to make sure that we end cervical cancer and we change and shift stigma so more women can get screened. We also want their children to be vaccinated. In order to do that, we have to think about the messages that we're putting out there and what we're saying about cervical cancer. It can't just be on the patients, it works for the partner organizations as well. Everything I do is for the women who are not able to share their story. This is just a very small look at some of the women, and it says the United States, but there are also people like Laura Brennan. Many of you have probably heard her story from Ireland, who shared her story and lost her life in the 20s. She was a graduate of our Survivor School. We have to continue to share stories and do this work, and we can't forget these women when we do it. We delegate responsibility. We know that patients know that there is a need for it to be shared. I look at my fellow survivor sisters as our partners in purpose. It gives them more meaning, and we found that it helps heal them from the cancer. And we celebrate success because we are thankful for them. In the end, they have a message that only they can deliver, and we remind them of that through this message. I'd love to be able to support your work. You can connect with our organization, Survivor, across media platforms. You can also contact me. I'm willing to help. It's a part of me making my survivorship count. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. That's what a legacy, dear. Thank you so much for being with us. This is very, very helpful, and I think we'll have many issues to discuss with you when we come to the discussion, to the to discussions with all. But let us now move to our third panelist. I'm pleased to give the floor to Kate Singer. She leads on communications and public affairs activity at Jaws Cervical Cancer Trust. Stories at the heart of the charity's work, and her team are responsible for all aspects of the digital communications, media relations, campaigns, and public affairs and the branding. Previous roles include public health policy and communications and working in a PR agency. The floor is yours, Kate.
Thank you. Just share my screen.
Yeah, we can see you.
Okay, so I'm Kate, as you said, and I work at Joe Cervical Cancer Trust, which is the leading cervical cancer charity in the UK. Our work is supporting those affected by cervical cancer, but then also a large part of it is working to prevent as many cases as possible. In my department, I lead on all policy work, all media, all campaigns, and all different communications as well. And as you say, stories is really, really important to what we do. It spans everything. Everything that we do at Joe's is the voices of the people that we work with and support. I'm not going to dwell on stories just because it's been covered a lot. But this is just, as you can see, this is just some of our, some of the comments that some of the quotes, that we have from our stories, the stories on our website. There are lots of statistics about cervical cancer and cervical screening, which are very compelling. But when you have a young woman telling you that she has lost her fertility as a result of cervical cancer, that's even more compelling, and a more compelling argument to make the most of some of the amazing preventative measures that we have, such as the vaccine, such as screening. Also for those affected by cancer as well, hearing from other people about how they've got through cancer, how they got through treatment, again, is just a way to make them feel like they're not alone, because we often hear from people saying that their diagnosis and treatment are among the most isolating times in their life, especially as it is a rarer cancer. So compared to things like breast cancer, where there are a lot, especially in the UK, sorry, where it's a rarer cancer, and so there are not lots of people who you potentially know who have had this disease too. We have lots and lots of media volunteers. We call them media volunteers and not case studies, because for us at Joe's, that is really what they are. They're volunteers. They volunteer their time, their experiences. They're not just an example. They're very much a volunteer, and so that's sort of how we work with them. We really support them as well. Sometimes people come to us wanting to share their story and they're not ready. They actually are just needing support and in a supportive phase. They just want to talk potentially. So we only will let people and work with them to tell their story once they are really ready. And we know that their mental health, sometimes it is a good tool for their mental health, but also sometimes they're just not ready. Working with the media can be cruel. Comment sections on articles, headlines in articles, sometimes the media can put headlines which can encourage people to click through and read the story, but equally for the person who is in the story, they can be pretty tough to read. The use of big capitals in headlines, for example, can really pull out the bits that are sort of the most cutting to that person telling their story. So we make sure we really support people and work with them and throughout their story. And as the previous presenter said, we stress the fact that they are not an expert in cervical cancer. They're an expert in their story. Their job is to tell their story. Sure, a basic understanding of the facts around cervical cancer is important, but when we work with them, we say, you just say what you know your story better than anyone. I'm going to talk really briefly about a campaign that we run called Smear for Smear. It started in 2015 to raise awareness of screening. It was really basic. You smear your lipstick and share it with a message about the importance of cervical screening, or smear tests, as they're often called in the UK. It was really successful. We gained national media coverage. We got front pages. We managed to get someone having a live cervical screening test on the news. Every year we created different news stories. We worked with social media, we worked with celebrities, we engaged policymakers. It reached millions, and we know in the UK that it really, really did help to increase cervical screening attendance, even though it was short-lived because it sort of ran during a specific time. It was only a week-long campaign every year, and we know that these things are often short-lived, but it was really successful. But we also know that smearing lipstick doesn't prevent cancer. If the right message is shared with it, however, then it can. And we're very careful about the campaign. We want people to know what it's all about. We're not saying smear your lipstick and prevent cancer. We're saying smear your lipstick, catch attention, create conversation, start people talking. And by sharing a message about screening, you can help to remind people, you can encourage people. And we're very, very, very careful with that messaging, because lots of campaigns can come under fire for how can pouring a bucket of water over your head, how can that raise awareness? How can that prevent a disease? All those kind of things. So we're really, really careful with the messaging around this campaign, that it's about reminding, it's about encouraging, it's about nudging. And we change the wording of the campaign every year. We change the focus. As you can see from in the top right corner of my screen, women dying of embarrassment. Embarrassment was one of our biggest and most successful headlines that we did. We did some research which found that embarrassment was the reason why about a third of women said they delay or don't want to go for cervical screening, which is evidently understandable. And it was by far our most successful campaign that we've ever had. But it's so much more than that. Through our research, through our support services, we know that the barriers to attending cervical screening are very, very much complicated. There are women with a physical disability, where we know that 88% of women with a physical disability say it's hard to attend screening. Among survivors of sexual violence, around half attend. We've decided to take a different approach for our campaign going forward, and in general for our communications, for our messaging. We are focusing on support, on empathy, sharing tips, sharing information. We want to be inclusive, and instead of just focusing on a few barriers, we don't want to further exclude those people who find screening a struggle. So for someone, a survivor of sexual violence, for example, who has really complicated psychological and potentially physical barriers to attending that test, simply saying it's really important, you should go, is not going to help that person. Having a reminder, I'm sure they will know about cervical screening and they will have made a conscious decision either not to attend or have reasons why they find it difficult. So one of our ongoing pieces of work is sharing, is focusing on the fact that cervical screening is something that people can be in control of. It's your test. You can say stop. We want to make sure that people know where they can find tips, where they can access support around cervical screening. And we know that it works. I'm not sure if you can read this, but this is just a tiny, tiny snapshot of some of the feedback that we've had around this sort of this narrative that we're putting out. And we're really trying to work with the media in the UK as well to support this messaging. Not saying you're silly if you don't go, not saying women, just not using that sort of blaming, shaming narrative, and really trying to do a really sensitive, supportive, enabling conversation, recognizing the fact cervical screening is not an easy test. It can be difficult for lots of reasons, but it is important. And so this is where you can access support and information to sort of help you, support you to access screening, to support you to attend. I think, so in summary, these are just some of the things that we would encourage people to use when they are talking about cervical screening, and that is the fact that it's not easy. Being inclusive, so even in terms of, so that's in terms of language, for example, for trans men with a cervix, how do we include them in the narrative and conversations around screening so they don't see screening messages and think, well, that's not for me, I'm not included. Thinking about how do we include people who might have severe mental health issues which make attending screening really difficult. Being sensitive, and that, again, we very much are really trying to get over that, not just saying go, don't be silly if you don't be silly, attend your screening. Listening and asking as well. Listening, we use social media a lot as a tool to listen to what people are talking about. What are their barriers? What are people struggling with? At the moment, obviously, the pandemic is having a huge impact, especially in the UK, on people's ability to go to the GP and also their intention to go to the GP. So really listening to understand and using that to inform our messaging. And if we're not sure, ask, and we work with patients and our community to ensure that our messaging is right, and encouraging others to be kind. And I think that's one of the most important things that I would like to stress, is the fact that we all have a role to, we all want to evidently reduce the impact of cervical cancer, and by us being kind and encouraging others to be kind, whether that's our communities, our supporters, our patients, the medical community, we can start to make an impact on that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kate. And now we'll move to the discussions, and we have a few questions. But first, I will start with Dr. Ibrahim. I have a question about, you being the regional spokesperson for the WHO, and you've been through very tough crisis that time, the swine flu, the bird flu. Will you tell us about that experience and how difficult it was for you to establish or work in messages about something hasn't been there and then it's erupted and you need to rely on what to be able to succeed? Dr. Ibrahim, it's yours.
Actually, with bird flu, it was really tough. I remember very well, a number of attraction of the media. The media was amazing. They just wanted to know everything. And people even flocked sometimes outside the WHO office and were asking questions. Is it safe to do ablution before prayer from the Nile water if people have thrown the chicken in the water? Things came out of the blues that were very, we wouldn't have imagined them happening. In my house, I had like 17 different channels one day coming to ask, how could you keep your messages to the point, concise? How do you gain the trust of your bosses to be able to talk and be able not, this is the World Health Organization. You're telling people what to do and what not to do. It's a very responsible and very, very difficult job, really, at times of stress. So there was a lot to gain. We learned a lot. We took it one day at a time. And as a tip, we always used to say, as far as we know, as much as people should be doing now with COVID, actually, because things keep changing all the time. We keep hearing the virus is different, when you should take the vaccine, who should take the vaccine. So always start off by saying, as far as we know. To this point, this is the information we have. It helps a lot as a tip, Dr. Samir.
And how we can benefit from this, the interest we witness among the media when it comes to the silent killers like cervical cancer. What are the tips you can tell us from your own experience during that?
Cervical cancer is a very different situation because, like I gave in the presentation, still people don't know so much about it. And we need to get the correct data, to have the advocacy papers and go up to the policymakers and let them make it an issue for them. Let them take it under their wings. We need to have the top decision makers decide that this is important. Once this decision is made, the media can come in full steam. Otherwise, we would have to go with, like my colleagues were saying, get the survivors to come out and talk about cancer in general, make people aware that this is a disease and it affects fertility, it affects psychologically the person. Let them be touched by what is happening. I think this is one way to go about it at the moment. Once we have the program on board, I will never undermine the role that is played by your organization, Dr. Samir, as UNFPA. WHO is very credible. UNICEF is on the ground. Their feet are there. And when these organizations unite together to make an issue of it, the media will be interested. One other point I remember during bird flu, for some reason, we are more interested in television. Television comes in and all the people who are working are there to face the cameras. But the journalists get very mad. I remember at one point, I had about 100 journalists there trying to get their questions through, and no one was giving them attention. Finally, I stood at the table and brought all the journalists together and told them, please, you have the time, but let's make a point. You're all attacking the government for not taking the correct steps. Let's all unite to fight bird flu rather than fight the government. I still have all those journals, all those newspapers there. I can't believe the impact that when you give a person, a journalist, attention, how the problem will be addressed. And if you ignore them, you can be really ripped apart. So always listen well, give them their chance, give them their opportunity. They're out to get a story. They want a story. So how to handle it so the story does not affect your organization, does not affect the public. It takes a little bit of eloquence.
Thank you, Dr. Rahim. Tamika, I want to ask you one thing about your experience. You've been through it. You spoke about it. You're encouraging everyone to talk about this and to give a good example of how, as you said, the legacy, your legacy that others have or believe in the same legacy. What are the challenges usually you face when you want to encourage the survivors to speak out and to talk about their experiences? And what you can tell us to benefit from in our region?
Kate mentioned this in her presentation, that it really is about making sure that they are okay with sharing their stories. A lot of times people just aren't ready to share their story, or they think they're ready to share their story. And the media can be cruel. You have to really take the time to listen, but also share the realities of when you share your story, it's out there. Right? There's no going back. You can stop sharing your story, but that article or that television or radio interview is still out there. So it's really important to understand what you are sharing, because your words may be twisted and maybe a portion of what you said will be used. Or we live in this digital media era of social media where there are a lot of headlines that are sensational and it's clickbait. They want to grab attention. So, a headline may be a certain way, There are many articles, and I'm a media person, and I've had it done to me where I read it and I wish that it hadn't, be presented the way that it was. But that's why you have to be very specific and very careful about what you share. So if the words are twisted, only so much can be done.
Thank you. Kat, there is a question shared by one of our colleagues, Dr. Shible, and he's asking about what do we need to do, what we need to do to make you succeed and having impactful messages, and where impactful messages are produced and sent when it comes to cervical cancer. Can you answer this question, please? It's yours. The floor is yours.
I think one of the most important points to that is working with the people you're trying to reach, because we can all speak about what we think is the right messaging, but there are so many different groups, like the presentation before about religion. You have different religious beliefs, different cultural beliefs, different personal experiences. So working with those groups, whether a message is developed by a person or by an agency, but it really should be tested with those groups to check that it resonates, because what resonates for you isn't necessarily what will resonate with that group. And also being willing and open to change. I think that's one of the things that with our campaigns especially is we are reactive. And when we see a new barrier or a new challenge that's come in, then we will look at our existing messaging and see if it needs to be adapted or changed in light of that. Like I said, with the embarrassment, that is something which a lot of people still do talk about as being one of the biggest reasons, but we know that that is not, from all of our learnings over the past few years, we know that that's not necessarily one of the biggest challenges to overcome. Some of the bigger challenges to overcome are some of the things like the factors around engaging religious leaders, like was mentioned before. So yeah, I'd say testing it with audiences is one of the biggest things that we can do.
Thank you so much, Leah. At the end of this discussion, once we have to finish because we were not given the whole time, but I do believe that in next forums we should have much more about communications. I want to thank Dr. Ibrahim, Tamika, and Kate, and back to you, colleagues.
Thank you very much, Samir, and thank you very much to the panelists as well. I really take the message, the power of the stories, and the power of social media campaigns, and yeah, that we really can build on that to advocate for appropriate cervical cancer care. Now up next, there will be two videos, one from Faces of Hope and another one for Together for Health.
I'm Sangeeta Gupta and I live in Delhi. I'm 55 years old and I'm working with a publishing house. I live with my husband and my father-in-law. I have two daughters who are already married. I actually started getting unexplained bouts of bleeding, and which slightly unnerved me, and I went to my father-in-law, who is a senior doctor in Gangaram Hospital, and he took me to the gynecologist, where I was diagnosed of cervical cancer. I was a little shaken up, but yes, since I have a lot of faith in the Almighty and I knew that I would be able to fight it, so I just got myself operated with a positive frame of mind. But after 3 months, my pap smear showed recurrence of cancer and at a higher stage. Now this shattered me because I was not expecting it to come back. My only worry was my children, who were very young at that time. They were still in school. And I would look at my daughters and I would become weak. But I introspected and I thought to myself that I have to make them my strength and I had to fight it. So that made me a fighter instead of a patient. My family was very, very supportive of it and they were very positive about it. So go for a screening, go to a doctor the minute you find anything that is not usual. and don't be embarrassed. After my experience with cervical cancer, I came to know about this HPV vaccine, which prevents cancer, which can be given as a preventive measure to girls. And I immediately got it administered to my daughters and also the other girls in the family. Honestly, I think I have started valuing life much more.
I didn't know about cervical cancer until I attended a professional forum. Once I found about it, I had to talk to my gynae about it. He told me actually there was a vaccine that would really be beneficial if I could get my daughter have it. I know with the good forums, then they will see the importance, because for sure this is very important. We're responsible to push it and make sure that every young girl goes for that vaccination.
Here at Parklands Baptist Church, we have put in place programs. We talk to our young girls concerning STDs, and we also, at a greater length, talk about cervical cancer. We believe as a church that if we don't do it today, then we don't have a generation tomorrow.
Thank you very much for sharing these inspiring videos. Congratulations to the organizations that have developed them. Up next is a coffee break, a virtual one. And after the coffee break, we will continue with the last theme of this forum, which is advances and innovation in the ecosystem of cervical cancer elimination. And in the meantime, we encourage you to explore the virtual platform, to look at the materials and the resources that are there, and to chat with the speakers or post any questions. We will see you at 1:30 or wherever you are. It's at past. Talk to you in a bit.